afternoon, everybody. It's 15:30 on the dot, and we've got so much to cover. We're going to get straight into it. But first, welcome introduction from me and from Marlene and Elena. We have been organising the new initiative here at EES on the Learning Hub, and this is our second theme since we initiated it back towards the end of last year with our sessions on AI and evaluation, which were very popular. And do get in touch with us if you'd like to catch up on some of that or be more informed or get involved in some of the offshoots that have arisen from that series of sessions on AI and evaluation. But today we're future orientated, very much in line with where we're going in this incredible polycrisis and the need for utter transformation of evaluation. And who better to address these topics than our stellar speakers here, whom Marlene will just introduce to you very shortly. But just a word about our Learning Hub. We are running this as a series of sessions that begin with these sparking discussions, where we have thought leaders in the field exploring, debating, and presenting their theories, practice, ideas on the particular topic. And these are then followed by 2 workshops, which are open to all, and we have discounted fees for our members. Please don't leave at the end. Do stay for the end, because we want to inform you a bit more about the follow-on sessions here, as well as a workshop webinar that's coming up from the Academy, the International Academy, which is on the topic related to futures evaluation on the 3 Horizons framework. So do stay till the end and be then fully informed in all the developments that are happening across these fields. Let me hand over to Marlene. Marlene will introduce our stellar speakers, and we look forward to enjoying your question and answer. You will be able to pose questions in the chat, so please do that. And we will then, after each presenter is finished, they will talk for about 10 to 12 minutes. We will curate those and pose questions, as many as we can in the time available, a few minutes. And then we will have a much longer period for open questions and answer at the end of the presentations. And there we will hope to be able to unmute you, some of you anyway, as well as curate the sessions through the chat and let you ask your questions directly. So we all look forward to a really stimulating session, and just to say thank you all for joining us. And most importantly, thank you to our speakers for giving up their time and engaging with us today. Marlene, would you like to introduce them?
Well, we're very honored to have 4 panelists come to talk to us today for this discussion, each coming with a different perspective, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So first of all, there'll be Zenda Rafir, who is very well known in the evaluation community. From South Africa, she is, with originally a PhD in ecological chemistry, but has been devoted to the field of evaluation for many years ever since, working around the world, across the world, at the intersection of development evaluation and transformation, particularly looking at the Global South. She was formerly president of the African Evaluation Association, vice president of IDEAS, and on the AEA board for many years too. So apart from all those senior academic positions she had, as I said, she is a devoted person to evaluation and is a real thought leader in the evaluation community. Annette Gardner is a very great specialist in foresight and foresight methods. She's a political scientist, an evaluator in the advocacy and policy change field, particularly. She was the chair of the APF Foresight Evaluation Initiative and co-authored the Better Evaluation Foresight Evaluation Toolkit and Guide, which is a very, very useful resource to look at for those of you who don't know about it. She co-edited and contributed to the New Directions for Evaluation issue on foresight evaluation, bridging foresight, the field of foresight and evaluation. So a very useful resource too to look at. Rose Thompson-Kuhn, who you can see there, is the Senior Lead for Strategy, Impact and Evaluation for Sitra, which is the Finnish Innovation Fund. Rose comes also with a very great knowledge and theoretical, practical knowledge of foresight in the use of it in strategic management and evaluation. So she draws on an extensive experience of that work coming from the UN background initially, but she has been working in Sitra for many years now. But Rose has a professional practice with an academic rigor as she's doing her doctoral research now, continuing the studies of foresight. And then we come finally to Jose Sierra Castillo, who is the person responsible for the evaluation portfolio for Europe for UNICEF. So Jose particularly has very practical knowledge and took the initiative of trying it out in the UNICEF and promoting it in UNICEF. So he also leads the development of methodological innovations, including the use of foresight, generative AI, and causal machine learning for evaluation. So before UNICEF, he worked as an evaluator in Canada, as an economist at the Inter-American Development Bank. The four panelists today are going to come with different perspectives on the subject, because whereas Zenda is going to put this into a very much global context of why we should be using foresight thinking today, Annette is the one who's actually out of the four dedicated herself a lot to building capacity and training in the field of foresight and evaluation. And Rose particularly has been very successful in getting foresight thinking and foresight methods into the whole strategic area of Sitra. And we'll be explaining that as the whole framework of how it works. And Jose from UNICEF will tell you exactly a very practical example of how it was done, with all sorts of details about that, and you can ask the questions about the application. So they're coming from four different perspectives on the same theme today. Thank you. May, I think you had something.
Zenda, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, May. I appreciate that I can be with you today. I just need to get my slides in order. Let me just get it right. Right, can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right.
Just it.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Good.
So I want to start with this quote, which has been my signature in my emails for a very long time. And we can see, even with what happened today and in the recent past, that we indeed are in the time of monsters. Bad things happen and unpredictable things that we struggle to associate with. So we all know the world is not what we would like it to be. So since the world is uniquely challenging, as humanity, we are not prepared to deal with it. So my first key message is that we are all responsible for making sure that evaluation plays a significant role in making the world a better place in future, because it can do so. But let's think for a moment about our monitoring, evaluation, learning systems. Let's think about our evaluation report, our theories of change, our learning strategies. And we will see that, and I trust you will agree, that the future hardly features. It's usually seen as either static or linear. In other words, tomorrow is not going to be that much different from today. And so our context descriptions, our evaluation questions, our criteria, our theories of change, our findings, our recommendations still do not account for the present, for the future. But now, of course, the future is suddenly prominent, even in evaluation. The question is why? Well, many of us know We know that we are in a time of polycrisis and a state of permacrisis with interacting compounding shocks. I mean, this moment is anything but normal, right? There's an ancient Eastern philosophy of yin yang that teaches, among others, that transformation is inevitable. Extremes inevitably swing to their opposites. And today, capitalism, especially our global economic foundation, has reached extremes with very far-reaching consequences. It's the reason why we have crossed so many planetary boundaries, 6 of the 9. And the crises, because they interact and they form feedback loops, are obviously very severe compared to previous ages. Climate change, ecological collapse, systemic injustice, AI, they don't threaten just the planet, just humanity, but the planet itself. And we are in a time of transition. We're entering a radically different world, and we already see that around us. Globally, governance and policy making are under strain, and we are in a beautiful word that is called a liminal space, the time between states, the stable state that we came from and the future state that we are moving into. And this period is marked by a period of uncertainty and disruption because so many systems are destabilizing, but it's also because of that a time of many, many opportunities. And it's really important for us to see that. And I recently wrote a blog post about that I encourage you to read. Also, if you want to see how the future, how mega trends in the world can be reflected in our evaluation practice. The point is that this demands profound change in how we work, including in evaluation. And the key point in my first key message here is we need to be able to better anticipate the future. We need to prepare better and build resilient and adaptive systems. And that is where evaluation can play a role. This time is all about better anticipation, better preparation, greater resilience. Now, my fellow panelists will talk about evaluation and the evaluation futures nexus. And I just want to say that I often apply futures thinking in my own practice, and I find it very important and useful, critical actually. My second message, therefore, is that the future is not entirely unpredictable, all right? It's partially predictable, especially because of the fact that we sometimes have slow megatrends that take time and that we know that they are happening. It is when shocks come, sudden shocks, black swan events, and also short-term thinking, that we realize that the future is increasingly difficult to predict. On the other hand, we already understand much about how to work in this space, right? And so I just want to highlight this slide. Futures thinking is a mental skill. It helps us to think about the future. Future studies is the academic and research discipline, right? Strategic foresight, which is really what this is about today, is to apply this, to anticipate. And it expands our capacity to imagine the future and act in it in order to have strategic options for policy, for plans, for strategies. And our futures literacy, of course, is the capability that allows us to better understand the role of the future in what we see and do. What I want to do, though, is come back to the point of anticipation, because we have this field of study that have helped us to prepare for the future and understand what is predictable, what is not, what can be done, and what techniques we can use to understand the different options. I often use the following diagram in my work because it shows us also that the more we understand about these different influences on the world, on ourselves, on our societies, on our communities, the better we will be at predicting. And this is why it's very important to understand citizens' cognitive makeup, their beliefs, their assumptions, the values, the rituals that they hold. And then on the other hand, the contextual factors, the norms, the laws, the institutions within which we work, the physical, economic, political, social, and also technological environment. And then, like the mega trends, global power constellations, global relationship dynamics, and social conditions in which we find ourselves. And this is also why some countries are better than others, because there are some countries who are better than others in futures work, in foresight, because they're better able to understand all of this and bring this into the models with which they work. And this is really important and useful to remember how complex the influences are that shape all we do, that shape us, and the psyche that enable change or work with change. So let me move on to my third message. My third key message is that the field of future studies and strategic foresight is sophisticated, despite this complexity. And it does offer us already a lot to learn from. My first scenario planning that I participated in was in 1992 in the South African context of transitioning to democracy. From apartheid to democracy, there was a lot of scenario planning going on at the time. I was part of all of this. It was pretty simple, you know, not sophisticated. We all came together in a room. We had 3 or 4 scenarios, but it was still sort of useful to get people to focus on the idea of multiple futures, and that we should prepare for multiple futures and anticipate what could happen. Now, many of us in the evaluation space will not be really connected with highly sophisticated strategic foresight methodologies. But it is important that it is a very sophisticated field of work. So I don't have time to go through any of this detail, and I put this very dense slide up simply to show that there are many initiatives, of course, that are dealing with the future. Many of them have practices that are very advanced. I've just put some of them in here. Maybe you can just let your eye go through them and see what triggers your interest. And then the examples on the right hand is very significant because I picked them from around the world. And I do want that to help us to open this space in our head that always look at one country or the West usually, or one space, maybe the UN, for information and participation in futures work and drawing from the work. There's a lot being done in the Global South, and there's reports published about this. The point is that there's all these many different methodologies and techniques that we can draw from, and that those who have especially the supercomputer capability, model very sophisticated models on. I think what is also important to emphasize in that, you know, today we are able to combine emergent methodologies, technological augmentation, you know, VR and AR, immersive prototyping, deep participation, sometimes across generations, geographies, and levels of governments that modeling takes place. And it's really important to note that all of this has helped countries to move into anticipatory governance, which evaluation is also supposed to support, embedding foresight capabilities throughout decision and policy-making processes in governments, right? And this is done especially in the Nordic countries, in East, Southeast, and West Asia, in large multinational corporations, and in some multilateral agencies. And then, unfortunately, also in military contexts, unfortunately. Now, we have also a lot of important networks promoting such work, right? Futures Chairs, the Global Futures Literacy Network. The UN launched the Futures Lab in 2023 to build foresight efforts across the entire UN system. There's the UN Chairs in Futures work that was established, as I said. So these are, we don't need to do our own foresight. We can draw from all of this that's going on and just place it within our own context and try to enable ourselves, building our own capacities. But we don't need to be expert. We can work with experts. Now, in countries where strategic foresight is really sophisticated, The impact on policy and strategy is very real, and you can see it in the way in which the countries have developed because they apply it. So just two examples. One is China. They heavily use research evidence and highly sophisticated strategic foresight methodologies in the development of their very famous 5-year plans that actually have been pivotal in moving them from Chad level poverty to the second biggest economy today in the world. They work in this with top-tier universities and scientific institutions around the world, and specifically in China. And I'm told really that their strategic foresight abilities are a key reason for their incredible success. And anybody who's been to China will know that it is incredible. Now in Singapore, the Center for Strategic Futures and Government Tech, GovTech, deploy live policy labs and digital twins for real-time AI-enabled simulations or scenarios to test policies in virtual environments before implementation. So this is not 3-4 scenarios, it's hundreds of scenarios with thousands of variables, right, that can be fed into these computer-assisted models. And their risk assessment and horizon scanning system supports continuous scenario testing to adjust policies in real time. Apparently much better than any comparable Western system. So my fourth and last message is simply this, that different regions approach, that it is important, as I mentioned briefly before, that we shed our Western lenses on everything. Culture and context matters very much in foresight, and especially culture. And just as a final interesting point, in many Eastern traditions, in East and Southeastern parts of South Asia in particular, time is seen as cyclical. Think yin and yang, opposing forces are complementary, seasons move in cyclical ways, and everything's interconnected. Foresight here often emphasizes harmony, long-term continuity, and planning that spans generations, 30, 50, even 100 years, driven by Confucian ideals too. Methodologies there tend to favor consensus, accept paradox, and see change as something to co-evolve with into the future, not to control the future. Strategic foresight is usually built into governance with top-down coordination and intensive training for officials. And by contrast, Western approaches generally assume a linear future. You know, progress is forward, systems are broken into parts, the observers stand apart from all of this. There is a strong focus on transparency, stakeholder involvement, and separating foresight from decision-making. In other words, this takes place in different spaces. These systems are often fragmented and advisory and very vulnerable to short-term political shifts. And if we look at indigenous foresight, it shares long-term holistic thinking with Eastern models, but it is even more rooted in place, in ecology, in spiritual responsibility. It's guided by elders, embedded in community practice, and passed on through stories, ritual, and seasonal knowledge, not formal tools. So for them, it's less about models and more about living futures through stewardship, reciprocity, continuity with land and culture. We must understand one is not superior to the other. They're complementary. They confirm the rich traditions from which we all can and should learn and blend as we need, especially now that we know linear thinking and reductionist thinking about the world does not cut it. So my final message is, this liminal time in which we find ourselves is filled with opportunity. We already know much that can be useful. And thinking and working with futures and foresight is really going to enable us to do much better in supporting those who need us most. And now I hand over to my lovely panelists who will take us through the nexus between evaluation and transformation.
Well, first, thank you so much, Zenda. First, have we got any questions? We've got a couple of minutes. If you'd like to pose a question in the chat, please do. Well, in the absence of questions, Zenda, if I could just ask you about the the relationship here between traditional hierarchies of power and effective futures thinking. I find it really interesting that China manages this really well, but to what extent does it engage its populations in joining forces to think through possible futures and to bring them with them? Because one of the things about thinking about the current turbulence and trying to exercise resilience and planning in that is that people come with their fears. There's a horrible future out there. It's all full of change. How do we deal with it? And working with people, it seems to me, is part of the whole process of effective strategic planning for futures. So what's your view on those power relationship side of things?
You know, thanks for that really good question. You know, there's so much misunderstanding about how China works that I cannot do justice to it, but let me try and at least touch on one or two points. China has 5 levels of government, from the federal or the state right down to local level. And whenever they do their planning, they consult across all 5 levels with the understanding that especially at local level, the officials who handle things there need to consult as they see fit. That's number one. So this notion that China is this top-down hierarchical thing that comes down on its people is sheer nonsense.
Mm.
That's one point. The second point is the what power does. And here let me bring I think what is really an important dimension. If power is well used by a government who cares for its people, a hierarchical approach with a certain level of consultation with a government system that has its fingers on the pulse. By the way, they do get citizen input also through what we would call complaint systems, right? And the difference is that they actually act on it because the officials' future is dependent on that. So there's many ways in which they do have consultation. But just to say that where power is centered on making a country work for its people, number one, and having strong focus on evidence, research as well as evaluation, as well as futures evidence or futures anticipation. Where you have that, which China to a great extent has, you are really able to advance as quickly as lifting 800 million people out of poverty in 40 years, right? The West likes to take credit for doing that, but it's so far from the truth. So my point really is that it depends on how power is used, and it depends on how power is consulted. If you look at our democracies today, it doesn't matter that they consult with people. People are on the street all the time, and they're very often their opinions are not taken into account. So there's a lot of nuance here in governance systems, in power hierarchies, and in how one consults, for what purpose, and how you then embed that in policies that really do matter. Lots to say about that. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Senda. Very helpful, very insightful. And we'll move on now to Annette. And Annette, take the floor.
Thank you. Let me just adeptly pull my slides up. Hello, and I'm glad to be part of this exciting session, and thank you to EES for organizing it. Marlene and May did an amazing job. As Marlene said, my particular perspective is that as a futurist who builds foresight capacity, including developing resources and conducting workshops, something that I've been doing with my evaluation colleagues since about 2019. So today I'll also do a recap of future studies and foresight, but trying to situate it in an evaluation context, talk about a particular model on how we actually look at the future, into the future, as well as an overview of foresight methods, and then discuss the benefits of foresight for evaluation and provide some suggestions and resources for expanding your foresight capacity. As Zendes was saying, it's crazy. It's a crazy world right now. And it's not just the poly crisis. We have rather unexpected things that are happening. Who would have thunk that we would be calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America? We see new political allies. It feels chaotic and it feels unexpected. And we'll talk about how foresight gives us that resilience in both anticipating and navigating this chaotic time we are in. Also, I think it is important to call out that these are stressful and somewhat scary times, and that we need to push through it. And there are ways that we can actually have some control and power and shape the future and shape a future that we want. So as Zenda nicely described the key ways that we understand what is future studies, is study of the future. As she was saying, it's usually alternative scenarios or multiple futures. We do not predict the future. It's just there's too much change, too much complexity. So we think in terms of multiple futures. And the discipline, it does bring a lot of topics and ways of understanding that would really benefit evaluation in terms of studying chaos and complexity, time, drivers, etc. And in our themed issue of New Directions for Evaluation, we are very forthright about saying we are an enterprise of bridging two disciplines. Foresight is indeed the capacity or skill of working with future studies methods and informing decision-making. It's a very action-oriented practice, very similar to how we characterize evaluation as being utilization-focused. And then also, so I put in what this means to be futures literate, comes out of UNESCO, and is something you might be seeing in the landscape. But again, it is the skill of using the future. So I thought I would present one futures model that I think has great utility. It helps us to anchor what it means to think about the future. It's called the Futures Cone. It's been around for a long time. And what it helps us do is we'll start with the idea of the gaze, or looking into the future and looking out in time, not fixating on the present moment or the past, but looking forward, much like you would with binoculars. But in this case, we're not looking to a specific point in the future. We have a much broader and expanding view going out in time, which means there's a lot of information to take in. But if we only look forward, then we only see an extension of the present or the probable future. But if we take into consideration key types of change, trends, events, weak signals, which are those little ideas or things that are at the periphery but could become significant trends. These are types of change that we can systematically identify and analyze and work with. And then if we overlay scenarios onto this cone, we see an expansion from just a probable scenario to what we would hope, the scenario we want for ourselves, or the preferable. And we also get some others. Let me just, oops, sorry about that. I just realized my forward key doesn't really give you, there it is. Just an image of the probable scenario, but we open up our vision, our gaze to other scenarios as well, a sustainability scenario, a possible collapse scenario. So this is just a way of systematically looking to the future. There are a few ways of organizing foresight methods, and I chose this one because it gives you a way of looking at methods relative to one another, or a stage model. And this is in many ways resembles what a foresight process will look like, particularly if you are doing an alternative scenario development process. You start at the beginning with understanding the change going on in your environment. As I said, you look for trends and weak signals, there are wildcards, and then you work with those trends. You look at their impacts of change, the futures wheel, which I think some of you are familiar with. And then from that, you develop your scenarios. And I've called out that there are upwards of 24 scenario approaches, of which one of them is the 2x2 scenario or scenario planning. And then from your scenarios, you can work with and identify a preferred future, but there are other ways of developing a vision, and including 3 horizons. And then from here, we emphasize the utility or usefulness of these activities and the information generated in informing decision-making, and basically shifting from a short-term perspective to a long-term perspective, and including it in our decision-making. So again, to reiterate, why develop your foresight capacity now? Why would we ask you to learn yet another skill and take time out of your busy lives to take on a new type of method and add to your evaluation mindset? Because the times call for it, and we need new tools to move us from what was called rear view mirror thinking and linear thinking to be more able to deal with complexity, the rapid nature of change, how disruptive it is, and stressful. Also, we know from foresight initiatives that around the globe, what's called public sector foresight, that it does improve decision-making and can result in future-proof solutions. Also, there's this question of empowerment and owning your future. And if you don't think about and plan for the future, somebody else will or already is for you, or what we call the need to decolonize the future. And this last point is very practical, which many of us forget, is that the future is where we're going to spend the rest of our lives, and we have to be accountable to it. And not just us, but future generations and our children, and they deserve a good future. Now, stepping back and sort of thinking of this in an evaluation context, my colleagues and I have been arguing that evaluation can't just be about past performance and evidence. It also needs to inform strategy, and this is what clients really need right now. And that foresight is about reconciling and balancing these two priorities. And that basically it is coming from within the evaluation arena now about moving away from rear view mirror thinking and moving beyond our assumptions based on the past to accept the complexity of the situation and create alternatives. And I cite this article by Fred Carden a lot because I think it's helpful for us to reference and look at the thinking that is currently going on to bring foresight into our practice. Oops. Well, that's very strange. Let me just... So where to begin on developing your own foresight capacity? We'll start with the strengths that you already have that are already a step forward into the future. And I've just put this list here that I don't think I need to read all of, and they should be very familiar to all of us, but we're nimble and creative thinkers. We are adaptive generalists. We embrace change. We love change. And actually, we're very well suited to look at new ways of identifying new types of change and working with change. Also, that we love to bring new methods into our practice. And this is an opportunity to do that. Last, I'll just talk about some practical steps. Excuse me. As Zenda said, sure, you can go bring in a foresight, a futurist, a consultant to work with you, and we recommend that. Excuse me. And we recommend that if you do not have that expertise, much like we would recommend to an organization if they had no evaluation expertise to bring in a trained evaluator. But if you're a commissioner of evaluation and you're foresight interested, you don't need to include it in your practice. There are many materials out there that you can read and be in, like these webinars, and that's a good place to start. But if you're an evaluator who sees the value added of bringing foresight into your practice, but you really just want to stop at that level, take a workshop in any one of these methods, of which, again, there are many out there. And then if you really want to really build out your evaluation practice and to be able to coach or instruct around foresight, go get a master's level training in foresight, much like we do like a semester-long evaluation course in the university setting. There are plenty of programs or courses out there. In fact, we have put all of these resources on the Better Evaluation theme page, so you can go check out all the different schools and trainings. So talking about resources, at the end of 2024, in various colleagues and organizations, we assembled a real body of work to support you going forward. And like I said, a lot of this is housed at the Better Evaluation, Foresight Evaluation theme page, but we've also developed a guide on applying evaluation and thinking to foresight, which is if you are in a setting where you're evaluating foresight, this would orient you, give you outcomes and indicator ideas, as well as what is it about a traditional evaluation practice that is very applicable to foresight. And then in our themed issue, we have both cases of foresight in evaluation practice, as well as evaluation of foresight. And then we also have other guides to help you move on your journey to building out your foresight capacity. And I just want to end with the many, many foresight and future studies resources that are already out there. Zenda mentioned this. This space is already very full, and we've curated what we think are some of the ones that are come out of the foresight arena and are accurate and comprehensive. And so with that, I will say thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Annette. Questions?
Well, maybe I can start with a question because it's fascinating for me to learn all about this. But Elena, because Annette is a good trainer, and she will be running a workshop later on how to apply this method, 3 particular methods in the evaluation field. What I want to know is how would you try to convince? A lot of the time in national governments and civil service, you have very much silo kind of ways of approaching work, and nobody wants to change. They're very conservative. And if you're in an evaluation unit and you're acting on behalf of your project people to run some evaluations, how are you going to convince them? What would be your messages to say why it would be good to stop thinking in such a linear way and think about how you could incorporate some of these futures ideas into your project and program evaluation?
That is such a great question. And it's so interesting because my colleague, Kathleen, she puts it so aptly, which is how do you get past the eye rolling that goes on? The sort of, and there has always been a bit of pushback about, do we have the time and resources to think about the future? It seems like a luxury, but I think we are making the case that this is an imperative to do this. In fact, COVID really, started to bring down some of the barriers around, yes, we have to do something because we're scrambling. So these stressful times kind of really motivate people to be much more proactive about the future. And we have definitely hit that spot again. But you're right about the structural barriers and siloed. And I sometimes think that cases do a lot for convincing people. And I was just talking to the folks at UNDP, and they do have a futures unit, and they have an evaluation unit, and they have created a relationship, and they do have a futures fellows program where they bring in futures trained fellows to work with evaluation programs. So this co-locating model. So I think that's always the way to get the message across, is to bring up the practices where it is happening at the organization level. And I know Rose will have more to say about that as well. But that's my quick answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, that does it.
Thank you so much, Annette. And we'll move on to Rose. And I'm sure, Rose, you will be, with all the work you do in Citra, all the innovation and drawing on practice. And of course, UNICEF with Jose has also been doing practical implementation of these approaches. So it's all very exciting stuff. Rose, take the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and a very good afternoon to all the participants, at least in the European time zone. Is my presentation, oops, now it's again the wrong format there. Is it good now, and is the audio okay?
We can see your notes, so it's not a presenter view.
Mm.
Yes, now it works.
Now it's okay.
Yep, thanks.
Great. So I will skip some of these slides because actually they've been very well covered here. I wanted to start by adding actually something that we started, and that's on that linear thinking. And this is maybe coming a little bit more from my research topic, where I have more time to look at evaluative work and in specifically complexity sort of focused or complexity aware evaluation work. And I wanted to just add on the great points from the previous speakers that this linear thinking we're really a little bit boxed in the evaluation community to this, because there's these decades of results frameworks and results logic models and the impact output outcome and impact models behind us, and it's very difficult to get sort of to move on from that, and yet we do know that we need to, because of many of the issues already mentioned. The societal challenges are becoming forever more complex, and we need evaluation to support us in understanding and adapting to those better, and also to transform those systems into where we want to take them in a better situation. But my case or my discussion is focusing a little bit on the Citra evaluation framework, because it brings us a little bit to more practical use of futures thinking and foresight in the evaluation field, and to this particular evaluation framework, which was developed in the midst of the COVID era, and where I believe all of us evaluators were really like thinking there was a bit of an existential sort of pondering on how to how evaluation can better help us to how we can make evaluation more of a transformative change agent. And I moved to the Finnish Innovation Fund, which had for long been very strong on developmental evaluation and impact evaluation, and there was a strong accountability focus because it's a fund that operates under the parliament, so we have a lot of accountability for the work we do, but also there's a different kind of framing for accountability, because we talk a lot about the intergenerational accountability and the accountability to the future generations there, not strictly on the accountability on how we have performed. And in that context, thinking of that work and how evaluation could be even more powerful change agent tool, we then thought that we should really articulate better the way that we evaluate our strategy that comes from megatrends and the futures work that the fund was doing. And this is why in late 2021, we kind of revised our evaluation framework, and we kind of took on futures and foresight focus in that evaluation framework. It's kind of the third pillar, and we revised our evaluation framework this year because we had a new strategy which was quite different from the old one, but in fact this is the one coherent thing that has lasted very well. And then a couple of words about how we've been implementing this framework since 2021. But the idea there is that we need to consider futures and foresight along the whole evaluation cycle. So one of the first points there is that, at least in my experience, the evaluation purpose is often ticking the accountability box, and to great extent also the learning purpose. But really the balance, which I think Annette was also referring to, is like how much accountability and how much forward looking and sort of future thinking do we want to bring in with the evaluation. And how do we want to use the evaluation? And this is a big question because you can do a lot more with the evaluation for the programs that we are delivering and for the kind of impact we try to achieve. So from implementation point of view, in our model, there are certainly, like they've also been covered, there's a lot of ways that we can integrate foresight methods and data collection tools to kind of broaden the data we have, to bring in more foresight data into the data analysis that we have on the evaluation, and also to use it more systematically for the context analysis. How are the systems that we're trying to change, how are they changing, and how they will be changing, or what are the trends and anticipation on how they could change. And the last point on this slide is really on the evaluation recommendations and the way forward, which links back to the evaluation design, because oftentimes that's the last thing, even though we always ask that, yes, we want evaluation recommendations, but then they're based on the evaluation. But if you, in the discussion of what's the purpose of the evaluation, you already kind of go into what do we want as an output from this evaluation, you're in a much better place to kind of design the evaluation in terms of could the way forward be more different alternative scenarios that you could deliver with the evaluation, and the decision makers could then use that, and the programmers could use that information to improve their programming and so forth. So those are the kind of the few pointers on the evaluation cycle, and how you then kind of mainstream the futures and foresight thinking in the evaluation cycle. On this one, this is from one of our evaluations, the most complex one we had on the sustainability solutions evaluation. And this was really like, and we have an article written about this. This was really like kind of trying to think on how can we use foresight methods in evaluation design. And the idea was that we could validate the choices when we have like foresight data from horizon scanning or the Delphi panels, and we could really like look at because it's very difficult to actually validate the relevance of your programming. It's rare to come across an evaluation which doesn't say that this program is extremely relevant, because we all hope that that's what we're doing. But to have any like kind of any rigorous validation on that, this was one way to look at it. And actually, it worked quite okay. The obvious is looking forward. When you use foresight data in your data analysis, you can definitely up the game and the relevance of the evaluation and the utilization of the evaluation, because you can provide programming options. And then learning is also very key, because as was mentioned by the previous speakers, a lot of the foresight methods are very participatory in nature, and they do bring in a lot of variety and context and understanding into very complex issues. The tricky one is looking back in terms of in our think, because this is in the context of the Finnish Innovation Fund, we were trying to kind of also look whether the past programming was like a retrospective analysis on this, and this was very tricky, and it wasn't necessarily so successful. But what it means to us in how you use the foresight methods or foresight data in looking back is that now that foresight, and especially the strategic foresight, is becoming so much more common across the international organizations, we really need to, we're also accountable to somehow look at the outcomes and impact of the use of foresight data, because we're investing in that. So this will become, and in the future, I think more and more a task for the evaluators, because as you see everywhere, we're investing more in foresight sort of processes and activities. So as evaluators, we need to be able to also look at, well, what was the value out of that? So a few examples and lessons, and I won't speak too long on these, because I know UNICEF has also great examples. But this first was a thematic evaluation, which was more broad, and it was the most complex of our evaluations, and it was the first one we did with very systematically using like futures thinking foresight in the evaluation. And we had a horizon scanning exercise, we had a Delphi method, and then we did an outcome harvesting on top of that. So you can guess that the lessons are that it was extremely time consuming, it was very complex design, But what we did get was a great buy-in from the program teams. And as we know, the program teams often are also slightly fatigued with evaluations who bring them like things that they already know and so forth. And also because it was a broad evaluation, it was the report and the materials in general were very useful for other organizations and outfits that were programming in the same area. So all in all, I think it was a successful evaluation. It was just very complex to design, going back to the evaluation capacity issues that Annette also mentioned. The next evaluation we did was a little bit less, it was using a little bit lighter sort of foresight toolkits, but we did have participatory scenario building, and we used a Horizon. We had a large Horizon scanning sort of data available. And I think I wouldn't say more about that because I think we know as evaluators what having qualitative data means. It really needs the quantitative data. This was a big evaluation that really was conducted in support of a big strategy redesign. So the last one I wanted to say quickly before I finish, because I think for me it was quite interesting. It's a smaller evaluation, and we use scenario building for future training content. This is a training that trains politicians, members of the parliament, and other decision makers and influencers. But my experience with case studies in evaluations has been that they're very often disconnected from the data analysis, and they're disconnected with perhaps the findings and the conclusions. There are good ones, but they often come with the disclaimer that this is potentially only generalizable to limited extent. This is not it's context specific. So we decided in this evaluation that because it was in the original evaluation design that we will replace the case studies which were backward looking, as you know, case studies often are, into scenario workshops and building mini scenarios. And that was very good. And I think that's the way we're going to go forward as well. But actually, I'm going to stop here. We've had enough of this. The one last point, which probably would be as an evaluator, something to think about a little bit is when we're boxed into the linear thinking, we often are also kind of working with targets and objectives, impact goals that are set at one point in time, and often to change them requires like board decision or something. And I think we need more flexibility in that. So long-term targets, maybe yes, when it's possible, but we've heard several times this. Sometimes the context changes, or often the context changes, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have long-term vision. So that's what we've also been trialing a little bit in terms of having different types of outcome targets or metrics. That's all for me. We have a community of practice for Foresight Evaluation Nexus in some years. Please join. It has been very quiet recently, and it would welcome active members with warm hands. And that's, I think, all from me.
Thank you so much. Rose, we've got a question here from Melissa, who's asking, can you elaborate on how you replaced case studies with the building of possible scenarios?
That's a good question. Yeah, it was probably a little bit hasty formulation. I think what we meant with that is, or what I meant with that is that when you often in the evaluation, when you commission out an evaluation, you often you write that we want case studies with that. It's just it's still a case study. It could be, you could call it a case study, but maybe the point is just that in our case, what worked very well, that we made the decision that no, we don't want the case studies, but we'll use the evaluation resources that were allocated in the budget for those. We will do them as mini scenarios. We will use that time rather into a forward-looking exercise but I mean, that's just how you define it. You can also, it can still be a case study, but the case studies, that at least how I understand, they often are looking at something that is a deliberation of like how the program was implemented. So it is looking back rather than forward.
But if I could just ask too, what you are talking about and what I'm picking up is that these foresight methods can be place a very heavy load in terms of the time it takes to do them and the amount of evaluation, if you like, resources. You incorporated different approaches, different teams, it's time consuming. And I wonder how you address that, and are there ways around this for the future? Because I would imagine that's for some who would wish to commission foresight approaches might find that a limiting factor.
Yeah, and it is true, but I think that's when you're designing the evaluation, I guess maybe we have that question in terms of how you're going to balance with the kind of the accountability or the backward looking side of the evaluation and the forward looking side of that. So I think it's a question of balancing with that, and in a way, if we think about participative evaluation methods, they are also very time consuming. And of course, now in our, I think UNICEF will talk more about it, all of these data collections, be them foresight based or what we can have more efficient sort of ways of collecting that data. Maybe the question is then how much participation we want in these evaluations. That's rather the question. But I don't think necessarily it's more time consuming, but maybe in our case, if you try to do everything, you try to do an outcome harvesting, and then you try to do several like foresight sort of processes on top of that, that becomes a little bit problematic. So maybe just the purpose of the evaluation, when that's clear, it helps you.
Thank you so much. And if we now have Jose, Jose is giving a presentation in partnership with Mirela Hernani, who unfortunately has not been able to join us today. But Jose, if you'd like to take the floor, we'd be really pleased to hear your approach in UNICEF.
Right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
We have to. I mean, I have the hard job of being the last person to do this, so I have to be a little bit energetic so that we don't all fall asleep Friday late for where I am. And yes, like Mirela apologizes, there was like a last minute thing at work or like everyone is meeting. So, but I'll walk you through everything. So before I jump into the content, I just want to acknowledge that this work was basically motivated by the work done by Rose and Annette. Like they have like this a special journal edition where we saw a bunch of papers that got us excited and thinking about the whole thing. So whoever says these kind of events do not work, we show that sometimes they do. So really quickly, what I'm going to cover is like the actual method, the actual question motivation for the use of the foresight, then how we apply the methodology. You're going to see that we did not use many of the tools that we're just describing. Instead, I think we grabbed a few, but we went really deep with them. Then some early findings, and then like I think for us the most exciting part, since this is the first time we do it, like practical lessons learned about like its implementation. So what motivated the use of foresight for us? As you know, UNICEF is an emergency fund. That's the E in our name. So we do a lot of emergency work. And then by policy, we evaluate every single one of our emergency responses. I mean, I have noticed, we have noticed, anyone has noticed that there's not that much of a high use of the recommendations from evaluations in emergency responses. And because of that, we keep finding the same recommendations across reports. Some of them, like especially the big pictures one, like, oh, we needed better evidence, or we needed to streamline X or Y, which is, I think, is just part of like how we work in emergencies. The solution is that we try to keep improving how we work, how we use evaluations for emergencies. We try to make them more timely, more streamlined, more quick. So, for example, like now we do a lot of like real-time evaluations to engage earlier in the process. We are leaning into data science, even some use of AI to analyze things really quickly. And just like even producing real-time briefs, like for example, for our evaluation of the response in Ukraine, we have like live dashboards that we will send to teams like once per month with insights of what's going on and how to adjust things. But there are nevertheless, like I think some issues persisted. Like honestly, emergencies are very hard work and people are just busy. So trying to tell them what to do or what to fix during an emergency is an uphill battle, and many times not appreciated because it feels like a criticism. Then again, between emergencies, people are too distracted. I don't know if that's a correct word, but they are too distracted doing normal work, and there's no urgency to the whole thing, right? So let's wait for the next emergency. So it's hard to verify the uptake of recommendations. Like we will do them, but you don't really know if the uptake is the right one until the next emergency hits. So then we were thinking, you know what, why don't we evaluate the emergency preparedness systems of not of UNICEF, but of governments, because we also work through them, especially in like high income, upper middle income regions. And that is what drove us into Foresight. Because as we started thinking, how do we evaluate preparedness, we realized this is much easier said than done. Like, if any of you start thinking, how do we do that? You will say, okay, I'm going to do a desk review, interview everyone involved in the system, maybe look at some capacity documents. I know UNHCR, for example, has a self-reporting questionnaire they send around. But I think, I mean, I don't hold the truth on that. I think that will lead to I don't know, bias is the best way to describe it, but I think biased responses, because everyone is like trying to imagine what's going to be needed. And then it's not going to be considered relevant. I think that like the same issue that we have with using the evaluation between emergencies, it will be the same. Like, why would I engage so hard on something when I'm so far away from the emergency? So we were thinking, how can we make this be real for people or close to their hearts? And that's when we brought the Foresight angle. So really quickly, what we did, like basically step by step, we built several scenarios. We were working with the Romanian government. So we identified future emergencies that were likely to face, being floods, earthquakes, political crisis, stuff that will be valuable for them. But of course, like when you do Foresight, they also tell you do not go only for the likely stuff. You have to go for the unlikely stuff. So we had to navigate that, and we ended up with like we went from like 10 scenarios to 4. Like the whole goal was to test the system in the end. Then to each of these scenarios, we attach like children needs, or how needs will be affected during how children will be affected during this crisis, and we simulated them. I'll show you later how that looks like across dimensions, like how many more children will need education, or how many new vaccinations do you have to give, like do you have enough space in the hospitals, and so on. We also measure the capacities that the society as a whole has, because that's another angle that we took. Like, it's not like a response to an emergency or preparing for it. It's not a government job only. It's all the society that has to respond. And then we simulated the whole thing in a very complex workshop that made everyone very tired. But at the end of it, also very, I want to say, maybe satisfied, not happy, but satisfied. I think everyone left feeling a sense of like work well done. So this image that now I realize is very blurry, but you just pretend that I made it blurry on purpose, because I don't want you to look at it carefully. But that's how we were like looking at how each scenario or how each crisis would disperse through the system. So we use this thing called causal loop diagrams, which are basically push-pull diagrams, where we model demographic changes and how this like affects everything and feeds back into everything. It's a way to simplify like the world a little bit. And then we transform that into dashboards that we used during the exercise. So this is just a bunch of screenshots, but each dashboard is dynamic, and we had triggers to say like, oh, like the flood happened. So we press the button for the flood, and then that will just project 5 years into the future, the needs that this flood will cause across dimensions. And the main reason why we did this is because some of the crises are localized. And we have noticed that like many times, for example, the municipality or a city will respond as if it was alone in the world, when other cities 100 kilometers away have all the capacity in the world to help, and they are not aware of that. So we also wanted to bring the dimension of like collaboration between different localities, because capacity is not the same and needs are not the same across places. But that was for our case. And then we just made it as real as possible for them. So we created like fake news segments, or talking about whatever was happening. And like that, basically the whole sequence of the workshop was we present the new segment, what's happening, then we feed the data, and then we prepare the whole bunch of like data collection sheets, if you will call them, where like people, like what they will discuss, and we will gather all the insights that they were happening, and how they were simulating their response. And it was actually like I think we capture things that we wouldn't have captured the traditional way. The traditional way, I think we would have interviewed people separately, or we put everyone in the same room and they get nervous and start being skittish. And here people were very open, and like I was surprised at some point, say like the Ministry of Health getting up and going to the Ministry of Education saying, no, you cannot do that, because if you do that, we won't be able to handle this need in the future. It would be better if we do this and this and that. And those are the lessons that then we are trying to compile into the report, which is still in the draft version. But some preliminary findings, we have many more findings. Like I just grabbed a few. But like there's sample space to integrate child frameworks in preparedness systems in their country. Like children don't really figure in how the protocols work at the moment. Same with the infrastructure and personnel. And there's a lot of institutional rigidity. Like during the simulation, even when they wanted to like do this and do that, so once we reminded them that they had to play by the rules of the country, their hands were many times tied. Like, oh, we have to go through this person, and with this person, we'll never get the permission to do what we want to do, especially at the local level. We were also looking at coherence, like coordination between local and central government is not, it can be improved, as is common across many big organizations, sectorial people operate in silos, and so on. Just to start wrapping things up, and some things that are practical for us, or like takeaways. And one is like how foresight influences the evaluation process. We find that it minimizes bias, but not in the way that you think of, like, oh, we got so many people together, so we triangulate it to perfection. But it's more like a shifting focus. Like usually, I think at least we are perceived inside the organization like we are auditing, even though we are not, right? But there's this fear, like, oh, the evaluation team is coming. But by shifting the focus from what went wrong or what we did, like what happened, to like what could go wrong and how do we minimize that, people just lower their defenses. And like I have never seen such an open group of people in my life. I think it also maximizes use. This may be me getting ahead, like putting the horse ahead of the cart. But we have been presenting the recommendations to the government, and they like are like, give me more. Like, come with me. I need you to come with me to this ministry to tell them that an independent evaluation team is telling us that we have space to improve. And usually, giving recommendations to anyone is not such an easy process. It also helps embed the evaluation team inside the implementation team, which I know there's mixed feelings about that, but for me that's important because it really gives us a sense of how the whole process works, and then everything goes more smoothly. And then by definition, the whole thing is forward-looking. Many times we do evaluations that we say are forward-looking, but by the time we are done with it and we do the recommendations, many people question us, like, how was this forward-looking? This one like truly is. Then like and how to do it, like other takeaways that we also have, like the previous one was like how do we see this shaping evaluation, but then on the how, at least I mean maybe it's because it was new for us. This was a learning experience. I think once we publish the report, there's probably going to be issues to be improved in the future iteration, but definitely we needed a multidisciplinary team. It's not something that an evaluator that has some experience with emergency work can come and do. I think you you need someone with the foresight experience, someone with the evaluation experience, and someone with the emergency experience, because you are simulating a reality, right? So like you really need that, like someone that's like a subject matter expert to be part of the process, even if they know nothing about evaluation. Keep it simple, in the sense that once you're actually doing, and I think Annette or Rose referred to this in her presentation, there's a temptation to do everything. Like, oh, let's use this and let's use that, and let's forecast this and let's forecast that. But the thing is, once you are in the workshop, there's a lot of cognitive burden on the process. People get really tired, really stressed, really quickly. So like you have to manage like your times and like the capacity to organize everyone and how much they can handle. Keep it real. This is just a lesson that we know we learned, because one of the scenarios that we had for political reasons, it was risky to use, and we replaced it for something else. It would have been better how we kept the scenario that was close to people's hearts. For that one piece, they became less engaged. You could see it. And just I would say for us, it took a while, but be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because again, at least for us, this is a very new process. Many times we will question ourselves, like, are we sure this is still an evaluation? Because like when we go to look at the checklist, after all, checklists rule our lives. And in the end, we were like, okay, you know what? It's an independent process. We are being methodologically robust, and that's what we are going to go with. Because otherwise, we were tying ourselves. Like it's such a new thing that exists. That all checklists don't always apply completely. And that's it. Happy to share more. This was a very stylized version of what we did, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jose. We've got some questions for you. Kabir is asking, what are the key methodologies and tools used by UNICEF for conducting emergency preparedness, doing anticipatory action evaluation to use foresight? So what were your key methodological tools?
Methodological tools for the evaluation or for emergency preparedness? Can you repeat the question? It's a very long question.
For the process that you went through in UNICEF for conducting this disaster preparedness anticipatory action evaluation?
One was the usual methods that Annette and Sandra describe for building scenarios. We didn't emphasize that much, because for what we were doing, there were many scenarios already built by other experts. So we just narrow it down. Then the whole these causal loop diagrams, that's very complex statistics with basically foresight with statistics going there to simulate what's going to go forward. And then I'm not going to get the name right, but our foresight experts use some of the methodologies mentioned previously just for the actual workshop to this is our desired state. How do we get there?
And if you could clarify that further on specifically the evaluation part of the process, because it does strike us that there's really important depth that's added by bringing an evaluative orientation, evidence-based orientation, the data that you get through evaluation, and applying that foresight kind of can deepen the rigor, among other things, of what you do. And perhaps you could clarify or elaborate a little bit on that.
No, that one, I think that's a great question. I'm going to answer with the end. I'm going to start from the ending, because I just had a meeting with the government, who is the main user of this evaluation, when we were talking about the recommendations. And there's this statement that they said in the end that I actually wrote here and I forgot to mention. They told us, because they were asking us to come with them to meet other people, and we're like, oh, this is beyond the evaluation process. And they're like, no, you are the independent team. You brought the robust methodology. And that's what's going to help us convince other ministries to do what's in here. Like they were saying, had this been done by themselves or separately, just internally, without the robust evaluation approach? Because we did check a lot. Like, for example, everything here is also reflected in this review, looking at documents, but more like the outside look. Just from a policy perspective, and this is not me saying it, this is the government saying it. For them, they say it's like a complete change in how they do preparedness, and something they want to replicate across other areas of work.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you all of our panelists here. We can move on now to general questions, or people can ask specific questions on a particular specific aspect of one of the presentations, or ask a specific presenter. So if you'd like to, well, we'll start with inviting one or two people to unmute. First up there is Peter van der Nat. Peter, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Marie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask your question? Would you like to unmute?
Yes, I'll do that. Hi, my name is Marie-Philippe. I'm a Canadian evaluator, actually. I'm hailing from Montreal today. Thank you to all the presenters. My question is to all of you. I am new to the notion of bringing foresight into evaluation. Everything you say resonates very strongly with me. I'm very interested. I have to admit, I'm intimidated with the notion of building scenarios. To me, that sounds like I have this reassuring notion of when you look backwards, you have a set of facts that you're examining. It's sort of bound. But if the suggestion there is to use foresight to explore complexity and then multiple scenarios, that sounds very daunting to me. So my question is more to be reassured, or to have some hints as to how those exercises go and how they're done, to not be completely overwhelming in terms of the amount of data you have to look at and how much complexity you have to engage in order to do these exercises.
Can I respond to that one?
Please.
So, we forgot to say that there are some easier to use and do foresight methods. And in fact, in the workshop that we're doing for EES and that we've done in the past, we have specifically found at least 3 foresight methods that can be done without a lot of training, and we teach those. The futures wheel is a particularly good one. It's just one page with circles and arrows, and it's so easy for evaluators because you're spinning out into the future implications. So just to say, yes, there are definitely different ways of coming at it. Alternative scenarios, and if we could hit that question in the chat. Alternative scenarios can be that you work with pre-made scenarios, so you don't have to do all that. And we do that, and we call that wind tunneling. So again, we teach you how you can bring that into your practice without having to know how to develop scenarios. And so that's a really interesting question for the evaluation field, because it could do that. And we did that at our G-Local presentation last week. We asked the question, what would the future of evaluation look like under these 4 scenarios that were pre-made? But the better task for evaluation would be to develop the scenarios, because it would force the field to actually identify the trends and the drivers and the wildcards and the emerging, the weak signals, and actually deal with that data that Melissa put into her question about funding sources. So you can do them either way. In fact, there are other ways to do scenarios, upwards of 24 different ways, but there are easy ways too.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Maybe can I just say that Melissa has a question here, and also Annette Griesel has a very good question. Would you both like to unmute and ask your question? Annette Griesel, for example, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I wanted to, because foresighting is a critical tool for planning, development planning, governance, and we've been using it a lot, including a very complex scenario planning. And I just wonder, but this session has been very, very insightful in how one can apply it in the context of evaluations. I wanted to just also ask the experts, to what extent can one learn from a prospective evaluation, which is forward-looking, anticipates the future, et cetera, compared to using evaluation, using foresighting in evaluation. Thank you.
No, maybe Rose, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I'm not super informed of prospective evaluations, but I am thinking that in future-focused evaluations or foresight-informed evaluations, you are working with time horizons a little bit. I might put it that way. I'm not super familiar with the prospective evaluations, but if it's about real-time data collection, I think when you're using foresight in evaluation, we are trying to build different time horizons and looking potentially even further in the future. But I think Zenda and Annette might want to add something on this. But when we've collected, so I don't know if foresight data is the right word to enrich our kind of data analysis, it's really looking at specific timeframes. So 5 years, 10 years, where do you see this? I don't know if prospective evaluation is using the same kind of data, or is it collecting, is it in the first horizon more, just to say that it's in the present and not in the past? I don't know, but I'll leave it there. Maybe others can contribute to this.
I can just very briefly add prospective evaluations done before the implementation of something. Those that I'm familiar with very often work with the future, but it's a very static future, and it's a future that looks very much like the current one. And so it's or the current situation. And so bringing foresight more systematically into them would be very enhancing. So in my view, they're complementary and can be integrated to advanced practice.
I would only add, if that's what prospective evaluation is, or which sounds similar to evaluability assessment, is and this can also be true for theory of change, those early stages, that things like the futures wheel, you can wind tunnel, you can actually, we've been mapping and trying to map each and every foresight method to each and every evaluation stage, even into the developmental evaluation space and evaluability assessment. And from what we can see, particularly as you move into theory of change, are things like anything that gets people to think about implications and assumptions, and the way that foresight does is a little bit more creative than the conventional way that we approach a theory of change. So that's where we're seeing so far in terms of practice, and what we're trying to do is to build that out through a curated book project that is going to put a lot of thought in that crosswalk between foresight methods and the evaluation design framework that we're also familiar with.
I wonder, Marlene, Melissa is about to leave, and I find her question actually really relevant.
I was going to say, it also ties in with Bernardo Silva's question. It's really about this current debate around the validity of evidence also. And so the impact of what's happening in the Trump administration obviously has a great effect on evaluation as it's being conducted. And so the question is, what happens if you have a scenario now where you've got competing political views, etc., on evidence and on the evidence that's presented? And how would you, under what circumstances would this kind of evidence, agreement, disagreement, be treated in a foresight workshop? How would you handle that?
Can I take a stab at that one?
Mhm.
Not on the Melissa one, on the Bernardo one. I mean, the exercise we did is like on a very, very sensitive topic. And I don't think in the report we're going to mention exactly to what degree. And what we need to get around this, because it was going to be politically, like, what's the word? Like, everyone to their own side. That's why we put so much effort into data. Like, yes, like you can do the foresight in a more easy way, like what do we think in a formal, systematic way. So we went through so much effort to first we disconnected the political event from the consequences of the political event. The political event is something that takes place and is presented as a possibility. That way it's less controversial. And then because the consequences of such an event can be still politically, that's why we invested so heavily on the data. And we modeled it so carefully, and we held workshops before the big workshop with each ministry and so on, to make sure that we had buy-in into the model. And I think those are yes, we did these steps for other reasons, but one of the main pushers was to avoid this possibility where this was going to devolve into, and I don't believe in this, or infighting between participants. And I think it worked. Once like it was presented like this, everyone just engaged with the exercise as it was designed.
I just wanted to call out that that's an excellent example, Jose, about how process is sometimes everything versus the evidence. And we have a whole area of evaluation called advocacy and policy change evaluation. And it helps, we have as part of it resources to help evaluators develop an awareness and understanding of the political and power dimensions within their context and how to deal with that. So how do you deal with oppositional politics, of which we have plenty, and also how to manage your expectations around evidence and oh, what's that? So I just want to say that even sometimes what we have in evaluation is the answer to our question. And we just forget that we have these resources because we're such a big arena.
Can I just interrupt and say, we're mobilizing now some really exciting question and answer, and the dynamic is super. And I would be very grateful if you, our presenters, had a few minutes more to stay on. For our participants, obviously we're over time now. Please leave if you need to. But if you can stay on, we will carry on for a few more minutes and hope to see you there. Meanwhile, just let me remind you, please check out on our publicity and on our website. Annette will be giving a workshop on foresight, key methods and models, on the 1st of July at 2:30 CEST. Please look at that and come and join her. And Zenda will be offering a workshop with Ian Kendrick on the 3 Horizons approach. And that's taking place on the 9th and 10th of June, running over 2 days, 5-hour workshop. I won't go into it further. Please go to our website, check out on that, because that also will be a really valuable workshop to join. And finally, on the 3rd of July, the Academy is hosting a webinar on the 3 Horizons approach. So check out with the Academy and check their website for more information on that. And we'll see you all at one or more of these. Meantime, back to the Q&A, and thank you so much, panelists, and thank you so much, participants, for joining us. I interrupted you. Were you going to say something, Rose? No?
So, Peter van der Knap has some questions, or mainly comments, I think. Peter, do you want to unmute and ask your questions? You had a question.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you. All the introductors for their presentations. I think I agree that evaluation use is depending on an evaluation's relevance for future decision making. And I also agree that the linear model is outdated. But therefore, as evaluators, we have invested in the system thinking approach, and also I think the old-fashioned but also very future-oriented policy analysis may help us. And if the forecasting business is booming, shouldn't we as evaluators stick to what we are good at and making more use of the system analysis and responsiveness and having complexity also in our methods? And that be our contribution to this aim. That would be my question.
I wonder if I can quickly, and I'm sure others would like to respond as well. But Peter, I think you make a very, very good point that we are building significant strength in systems and complexity work. We may have been a little bit behind others, but we are fast catching up. And it is a strength. For me, foresight is an integral part of that. You can't really think of a system without thinking of the evolution of that system, given the contextual changes that we are in. And you are also right that we have other ways of working, policy analysis, predictive methods, and so on, that have been part of evaluation, part of planning. My view is that we should bring these together to get as good as possible in coping with the present as well as the future. So I think that's why I think it's important to cross these boundaries between futures or foresight people and evaluators, development specialists, planners, strategists, because we really can learn from one another to enrich our own fields. And the last point just is a lot of effort has been made in forecasting. Forecasting normally assumes a linear progression, and it's usually number orientated, it's really limited. So I think it's good if one can expand that thinking also to foresight rather than forecasting.
I would just add that to maybe drop the boundary idea in terms of distinguishing between evaluation and foresight, and in that to see foresight as also being another type of systems thinking, as many of the same elements. That's what the futures wheel is all about. And if you can look at it that way and see how they supplement, complement, overlap even, then there's no reason to question bringing foresight in. In fact, we typically have been pointing out where the two disciplines do overlap around, and that is a really significant overlap already, and start from that place. So not to quibble, but and the other thing about forecasting is to see that as a method, as part of the toolkit, future studies toolkit. It's very helpful when you're working with your trends and developing alternative scenarios to either develop or to have forecasts, because the cool thing about having trend data out into the future is that that's information that you can work with, and how things will evolve, how you can cross-impact it. We use demographic forecasts quite a bit, like an aging population, rising and declining birth rates, which is very topical right now. So I, again, think about backing away from boundaries and think about, remember, we encourage people to be multidisciplinary, and evaluators pick and choose and work with theory and practice from all sorts of other disciplines. And I think we can be broad-minded in thinking about foresight as well.
Marlene, can I just quickly say that Peter also raised a very important issue that, for example, in the Netherlands, they've been working on scenarios for decades. And it comes back to the benefit that we have, that there are people who have been working on scenarios and from which one can draw. Right, so as some of us have also said, and I think we should look for the opportunities to do that, to help it, so that we don't need to rediscover scenarios.
I'd just like to ask a question about, coming back to Melissa's point, actually. Unfortunately, she had to leave, but she does make the point, and obviously we're all aware of the fact that with the Trump administration, they've had quite a huge impact on evaluation, the field of evaluation, particularly those working with anything to do with the global south or emergencies, etc. And referring back to the Academy and your meeting on the 3rd of July, from what I understand, it's a lot to do with how you used foresight methods to look at the future of evaluation. And I wonder if you actually brought in a little bit of some of those scenarios of what actually happened into that work, which you'll be presenting on the 3rd. So the 3rd of July is not about methods per se, it's about the future of evaluation using the methods, correct?
Yes, can I quickly, because I see Rose's hand, I don't want to interfere with the sequence, but since you posed that, yes, it's exactly about the future of evaluation. And we just use 3 horizons as a foresight technique for the field as a whole. So there's really a nice dual purpose to participating in that webinar. But may I just also say, given Melissa's question, which I think is really important, we are seeing 2, 3 different possibilities unfolding. The first of all, I think that it is not just Trump. It is aid generally is receding and becoming more aligned with countries' strategic interests. So it's very likely it's also becoming increasingly handled by agencies that don't have experience in, let's say, development work, and certainly not North-South development, where a huge amount of evaluations have been done in the past. And so there will be a lot of negative consequences from these shifts. And I suspect, but this is simply, things can go one of 2 ways in the development evaluation space. It can become more strategic, so more strategic evaluations, fewer project evaluations, because decision makers will need input for strategy, right, at a higher level of decisions. That's one possibility. As resources recede, it will also recede for evaluation. Or it can become far more frequent because people really need to know where to put their money, especially prospective type of evaluations. Most certainly, there are others that may take over. There has been a huge outcry or outburst in Africa about the fact that aid and aid evaluation have not served the continent well at all. And it is time that governments take over on the continent and the global south more widely, because many people see evaluation, not so much evaluation, but development and aid work simply as soft power projection rather than real care for what takes place. That's right or wrong, right? But that's perceptions. So there is a move to try to get governments to engage more with this. And then finally, there are also funding coming now from the Gulf countries, from the East, people who traditionally have not been really into the development environment. South-South cooperation is increasing, and evaluation may take a different form in there. My bottom line is we should all work more towards